people might have, if they've used the internet and they've used various platforms, they might have a vague ambient sense that things they once loved, things that seemed to work, no longer seem to work as well. And you are here to tell them, Cory Doctorow, that what they think they notice is not an illusion and not a trick of the mind, but is in fact a real phenomenon which you have christened Enshittification. So what's going on?
Sure. So Enshittification, I should say, is the culmination of more than 20 years' work with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, nonprofit digital rights group in San Francisco. And it's just the latest in a series of similes, metaphors, framing devices, cute words I've come up with to try and describe these complex issues of tech policy. And Enshittification makes an observation about the pattern through which platforms decay. It hypothesizes a reason why that decay is happening now, and it proposes a solution. So the pattern, I think, is very recognizable. A platform in the beginning is good to its end users. It finds a way to lock those end users in. Once it's hard for those end users to depart, it makes things materially worse for them in order to make things better for business customers. Once those business customers are also locked in, it makes things worse for everyone in order to make things better for the shareholders and for the executives at the firm.
So you're describing there a process by which something like you give case studies of Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, by which they deteriorate or get, you're talking about getting worse. Now, can you explain a little more what you mean by something getting worse?
So I'll give you an example. I often use Facebook, but I've given that example 3 times in speeches today. So I'll give you a very concrete example from Google, one that we have hard evidence for. So you may have felt when you use Google that it feels like the search results aren't as good. There's actually a reason for this. So last year, the Department of Justice sued Google for antitrust violations. They served discovery notices on Google executives' memos, and then they published a bunch of them. And in that evidentiary record, we see an epic struggle that played out at Google about the quality of Google search. So in 2019, Google had hit a wall. Their search growth had stalled out for the very good reason that they had a 90% search market share. And it wasn't like they could convince more people to use search, and it wasn't like they could convince us to use search more. We were already typing every fool thing that came into our head into a Google search box. And so how are you going to grow? Well, you could breed 1 billion humans to maturity and hope they become Google search customers. That is Google Classroom. It takes a minute for that to mature into a viable growth strategy. In the meantime, they want to keep the street happy. They want to show growth. And so this guy, Prabhakar Raghavan, who's the head of Google Search Revenue, he's an ex-Yahoo guy, he's an ex-McKinsey guy. He has a solution. He says, why don't we make search worse? So what we'll do is we'll take all the things we use to one-shot your query, right? So you search for trousers, we also search for pants. You make a spelling error, we try and correct it. You make a search that relates to something in current affairs. So, someone throws a submarine sandwich in National Guardsman, you search for submarine sandwich. We put something about that story near the top. So we're very likely to get you your response in one go. We take that stuff out. So now you have to search twice. You just type submarine sandwich and you don't get your query. You have to type submarine sandwich National Guardsman DC. Well, now you've done 2 queries. There's been 2 chances to show you ads, right? Now, as against this is his nemesis, a guy called Ben Gomes. He's a definition of an OG Googler. He built out their server infrastructure from one computer under a desk to a global network of data centers. And now he's the head of Google Search Technology. And he is palpably appalled by the prospect of worsening this search that he's in charge of. And you see them fighting in the chat, in the emails. Now, if Google had viable competitors, right? If it hadn't been bribing Apple to the tune of $20 billion a year not to make a rival search engine, if they hadn't bought the default search placement on every search engine, every browser, every mobile carrier, every OS, if they hadn't bought all the shelf space, there might have been some viable competitors to Google, but there aren't any. They're not just too big to fail, now they're too big to care. And so when Ben Gomes says, I would feel icky if we made our search worse, Prabhakar Raghavan says, but we will be richer if we make the search worse. Now, there was a time when Ben Gomes could have said, I will feel icky and we will be poorer if we make the search worse. But once that argument goes out the window, he loses the argument. And that's why Google search sucks.
Well, it seems like what you're describing there is a perverse incentive on behalf of for-profit corporations who, it seems like if there's an argument between 2 guys at Google over whether we should make the search better or worse, the guy who says, I don't think we should make it worse, doesn't have an argument if it can be proven that it will make them richer to make it worse.
Sure.
Because ultimately, it's a for-profit corporation. He needs to be able to show that you would be richer for making it better. And if he can't show that, if it's just a matter of principle, well, they did take "Don't be evil" out of the corporate charter. So.
Well, you know, I have had my fellow leftists say things like, "Isn't this just capitalism?" Right? Well, here's the thing: Google search used to be better, right? So if it's just capitalism, you need a theory about why it was better, and given that we can point to specific policy choices that were made that allowed Google search to get worse, that allowed them to get worse without losing money, you have to explain why those policy choices were inevitable, because we have had different policy environments. This policy environment historically is very weird. It is quite enshittigenic. It encourages firms to make bad choices. Oh, I have
another Cory Doctorow coinage.
We are living in the Enshitticene. I'm in favor of disenshittification. My adversaries are anti-disenshittifiers. I can do this all day like a Latin student. But the fact is that Google once upon a time had better incentives, and they didn't have better incentives because they were better people. They had better incentives because our policymakers attended to the likely outcomes of bad policies, and they made better ones. So take the decision to allow Google to acquire most of its competitors, right? This is under the law unlawful. From the sort of post-Gilded Age until the 1970s oil crisis. Broadly speaking, we did not allow firms to acquire rivals for the purpose of reducing competition. It can be sometimes hard to figure out why they're acquiring a rival, but we blocked a hell of a lot of mergers. Like, infamously, Vaughn's, a Southern California grocery chain, was prevented from buying another Southern California grocery chain because it would have increased their market share to 7%. So that's the kind of antitrust enforcement we used to do, right? What we did with Google was we said, no, you can just buy you tap the capital markets, buy anyone you want to buy. So Google is a company that has had one successful in-house product launch. It was a search engine that they made a millennium ago. And in the current millennium, virtually everything they've made in-house was a failure. And virtually every success they've had was someone else's company they bought and operationalized. They are not Willy Wonka's Idea Factory, right? They're rich Uncle Pennybags. They bought all the other kids' toys, right? And we could have just stopped them from doing that. Yeah. We did stop many firms from doing that. That is how they became too big to care.
I was trying to remember what else they had made, and I was like, the glasses.
The glasses, Google Video, Orkut, Google Plus.
Google Plus was their Facebook imitator that never went anywhere.
Yeah. They've had lots of failures, and they've actually, where they've had successes in sectors, it's often after their own effort failed. So Google Video failed, YouTube succeeded. That's someone else's company, right? So you see this up and down the stack, from A to Z, as they say, in the whole alphabet, right? And it's not just Google. And the mergers that were waved through even when the firms in question explicitly said they were for anti-competitive purposes. So, Mark Zuckerberg is a guy who's never had a bad idea he didn't put in writing. And this should nominally make it very easy to stop him from doing bad things because, this is a guy who's got a folder on his desktop called mens rea. And, when he was buying Instagram, his CFO sent him a memo and said, Mark, why are we spending $1 billion on a company with 12 employees? And he said, well, I think you'll find that people like Instagram better than Facebook. They leave Facebook, they go to Instagram, and they don't come back. We should buy Instagram so that we can recapture those users. This is a guy who also periodically and frequently put into writing his motto, it is better to buy than to compete, right? So this goes in front of the Obama DOJ, and they're like, we see nothing wrong with this, right? So this is like, it's like if he'd sent him an email that said, Bob, that guy we're going to kill. I just want to know for the record, I want you to know this is a murder. And as I type these words, I am premeditating it, right? And if you cannot stop a merger on that basis, you cannot stop any mergers. And so no one came down from a mountain with 2 stone tablets and said, we're going to let these companies buy each other. Robert Bork, notorious racist Nixonite criminal, Supreme Court justice that almost was, who, failed in his bid because of all the bad things that came to light of it. Reason we have a privacy law, the last consumer privacy law passed in this country was in 1988. It's called the Video Privacy Protection Act. It bans video store clerks from disclosing your VHS rentals. It's because during Bork's confirmation hearing, someone disclosed his VHS rentals. And, the best thing you can say about Bork is he had pretty good taste in movies, but I think a lot of Congress people were like, oh shit, I really don't want my VHS rental habits disclosed to the newspapers. So they broke all land speed records to protect our privacy and have not done it since. We have not had a single technological threat defended against because of this. And so Robert Bork said, monopolies are efficient. And he said, when you observe a firm in the wild that has attracted a 90% market share, you should infer that is a firm that has made 90% of people very happy. And you should do nothing to stop them. And you know, the authors of Antitrust law, they were willing to countenance the possibility that a firm might acquire a 90% market share just by being good at their job. And they said, even then, we should not allow them, because once they have that power, we can't take it back from them. You know, John Sherman, the author of the Sherman Act, the first antitrust law, 1890, brother of Tecumseh Sherman, the guy who burned Atlanta, he stumped for a speech on the Senate floor, and he said, if we would not tolerate a king of America, we should not tolerate an autocrat of trade with the power over the necessaries of life. So Robert Bork reverses this. And like when we stop enforcing antitrust law, the laws intended to prevent monopolies, to no one's surprise except the antitrust economics bar, we got a lot of monopolies. And these guys still insist that they did nothing wrong.
You've been talking about the roots of enshittification on unregulated, giant, monopolistic corporations that don't really have any countervailing power in the form of, unions or the state cracking down on them and allow the sort of the worst incentives of capitalism to produce the worst possible thing. I was wondering if we could go back a little bit to the details of not just what an enshittified product looks like, but what a non-enshittified world would be like. Sure. You cited the example of Google searches becoming more frustrating. In fact, Alex, in his review of your book, talked about the way that they it's hard to get things from more than a year ago. Or Amazon, you cited the example of Amazon having all of these AI written books that pop out when you're trying to find a book.
There's one called Enshittification.
I wondered if this had been yet the subject of one of these fake little summary books.
Yep, it has been.
So tell us more about people's experience of an enshittified set of platforms and what it would look like if they weren't enshittified.
Sure. So, in many ways, a non-enshittified platform, it looks a lot like the enshittified platforms when they started, right? So let's talk about Facebook. When Facebook started and they opened up to the general public, they said, you don't need a .edu address anymore. You don't have to be an American college kid. Anyone can sign up. They made this offer to people. They said, hey, you've all got an account on this other social media service called MySpace, but did you know it was owned by an evil, crapulent, senescent Australian billionaire, immortal vampire named Rupert Murdoch, and he's spying on you from asshole to appetite. Come to Facebook. We'll never spy on you, and we'll only show you the things that the people you have followed have posted for consumption. And that's what we got. Now, we had this lock-in as well. And other firms do lock-in through fairly esoteric and sometimes expensive measures, like Uber. They lose $31 billion in 13 years, losing 41 cents on every dollar of every ride in order to hold back transit investment and bankrupt all the other cab companies, so that then they can double the price of cabs and pay their drivers half the wages. But when it comes to Facebook, we lock ourselves in, and we lock ourselves in through something economists call the collective action problem, which is just a way of saying, you love your friends, but you can't agree on what board game you're going to play this weekend, much less when you're going to leave Facebook. And because you love your friends more than you hate Mark Zuckerberg, you don't want to pay the price of leaving Facebook without them, and so you're all held hostage there. Now, that could have applied to MySpace as well. And it did. People loved their friends on MySpace too. But the way that Mark Zuckerberg solved that problem was not by saying to people, hey, come to Facebook and smugly admire our superior privacy policy until your stupid friends get the message and join you. He said, here's a bot. If you give it the login and password to your MySpace account, we will send it to MySpace several times a day, where it will impersonate you to the service, scrape everything in your feed waiting for you, put it in your Facebook feed, let you reply to it, and then push it back out to MySpace. So you don't have to choose between the people that you love and the service that will give you a better deal. You can decompose the pre-feast offer of have friends on MySpace but be spied on into don't be spied on Facebook and still have friends on MySpace. It becomes a la carte. And that is what I think a good disenshittified internet looks like. It's not an internet where cupidity and greed have been banished. It is an internet where we have a counter move for cupidity and greed. And that counter move is not merely technological, but nor is it merely crossing your fingers and hoping that a public prosecutor takes your case and smacks around the company that's immiserating you. It is a mix of several different kinds of discipline that you can impose on firms in order to produce a distribution at the end of each day in which a larger share of the surplus generated by the collective action of everyone on the internet is going to people and not to firms and their investors.
As I think about what a non-enshittified platform is, I did an article a couple of years ago about Wikipedia, which seems to have defied the trends and gotten better. And I think the most obvious thing is it's not for profit and it's democratically run by its users. And so the incentives kind of align with making a thing better rather than making a thing worse.
I think that's true. It's very interesting, actually, the case of Wikipedia. If I were a grad student, this would be a thing I'd be really looking into. So Wikipedia is one of many public interest internet projects that were originally organized as something that's sometimes jokingly called the benevolent dictator for life model. So you have someone who starts the project and they're, it was their vision, it was their idea, it was their sweat equity that kicked it off, and they bring in volunteers or sometimes people who are paid, but a big community of people who co-create this. Yochai Benkler calls it commons-based peer production, right? So open source projects and so on, message boards. And almost all these projects, unsurprisingly, are started by people who call themselves either liberals or leftists. Right? I want to start a big public interest project where volunteers make public goods, right? And all of those projects, almost without exception, are still run by their benevolent dictators for life, who are often, as much as they are very benevolent in their intentions, not infallible, and make terrible mistakes, sometimes really ghastly ones, sometimes ones that are catastrophic to the project and end it, because these people are just high on their own supply. No one can tell them that they're getting on their shit again. And so they do something dumb. We've all experienced this. Now, Wikipedia was started by a really wonderful guy who also happens to be a fire-breathing libertarian, Jimmy Wales, right?
That's so fascinating.
His favorite novelist is Ayn Rand.
I still don't get it.
One day Jimmy Wales woke up and he said, this project is too important to have one man who keep its vision and be its final arbiter. What we need is a committee that comes out of the collective that allows the workers to own the means of production.
Did he even read The Fountainhead? I was shocked.
He's like our work should have really let all those other people decide how things work. Reardon Steele would have been much better as a workers co-op. It is very weird.
Yeah,
it is very weird, and no one. I think again, it's one of these things like antitrust surging, despite the fact that billionaires hate it. It's one of these things that no one's really.
Well, you must have met him. Have you ever? Asked
Jimmy's a dear friend of mine.
Have you ever asked him to explain the contradiction?
I have not asked him about this, but I would be interested to know what he says.
And he attempted a Google competitor at one point too.
He did,
in the mid 2000s.
His pitch for this was, if we can capture 1% of Google search, that I forget what the number was, but $1 billion, something, just call it, right? Because they're making up $100 billion a year. And that felt like a very exciting and achievable goal. But by that point, Google had consumed so much of the market oxygen, it just wasn't plausible.
Thanks for watching. This video is a product of Current Affairs Magazine, the country's leading independent left print magazine based here in New Orleans, Louisiana. Go to currentaffairs.org to find out more about us, and currentaffairs.org/subscribe to subscribe to our absolutely gorgeous bi-monthly print edition. Get it in your mailbox. You can also subscribe to the Current Affairs News Briefing, the Current Affairs Podcast, or you can subscribe to our digital edition. Current Affairs is entirely reader-supported. We have no ads. We have no corporate backers. We depend on you. So please consider purchasing a subscription or making a donation to Current Affairs today. We are a 501c3 non-profit organization, and your donations are tax-deductible to the extent allowable by law. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.